All right, we are finally recording after a good amount of time trying to figure this out. This is my first interview on the YouTube channel, The Bible with Brady. Welcome, glad to have everybody with us. And this is my grandmother, Deanne Blanchard. No, that's your maiden name. What's your middle name?
Claire.
I knew I was going to say DC, but
Yeah, Claire.
Claire Smale. Grandma, glad to have you with us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
You knew about this how long ago? How long have you been preparing for this?
An hour. Not very long.
It wasn't supposed to be a surprise, but it ended up being a surprise because I was trying to make sure all the stuff that I ordered that was supposed to come in and to worked properly, and I thought I had everything going. But we had a little bit of a curveball. So I'm recording with a lesser quality camera on my end, but on her end, good camera. So been exciting to see the Tigers doing so well.
I am. They're great.
And we know Grandpa is a big Tigers fan.
Absolutely.
And so I actually have been watching some games this year because they've been playing so well. My dad actually came over and watched a game. When was that? 2 days ago, and we watched the Tigers. He had to leave in the 8th inning, but they've been doing well, and I know Grandpa would be excited about that.
And that was probably a first for the two of you to do that together like that.
It's, definitely, we haven't watched a game like that. No, I can't remember, at least the last time.
Right.
So yeah, it's exciting. You know, there's a few things that can get my dad out of his shell. And baseball's one of them. Golf is another one. And it's just a different side of him. So it's always exciting to be able to spend time with him. I kind of am recording this for myself. So that way 20, 30 years from now, you know, I can look at this and show my kids and eventually my grandkids a little bit about your life. For those of you that are watching, my grandma is one of the godliest women that I know, and she's helped lay the foundation for me to be a minister and, of course, a Christian, and been a big part of my life. A lot of good memories growing up, and it's been amazing to see the faith that you and Grandpa have had over the years, how that's impacted not only me, but all of the other grandkids as well. And as we get started, I don't want to talk too much because I can go on and on. I'm a pastor. I can talk forever. But one of the things I've always loved about you specifically, and Grandpa, of course, but was that you always wanted to be involved in all the kids and grandkids' lives. Even though, you know, each of your grandkids is very different, and some of them are heavily involved in certain things that others aren't involved in at all. But anytime I'm around you, you're always talking about all the kids and grandkids, what they're doing. And so I appreciate that. So tell us a little bit about your life growing up.
Well, it's a complicated story, but when I was a little girl, at the end of World War II, my family, my sister, my brother, my mom and dad, and I moved out to California in hopes that my dad would get a better job out there with more income, and that they could build their own house and have all the things that they always wanted to have. And at the time, it was the end of World War II, and so we took a train out to California. And my favorite story was my sister, who's 4 years older than I. She was so excited because all the soldiers were coming home from the war at that time. And so the train was filled with men in uniforms, young men. And my sister was just so infatuated with them, and it was fun to watch. And at that time, because they were just coming home from the war, they had priority. They got the seats, they got the best of places on the train, as should be. So that was an exciting time when we went out to California. But after we were only there for a couple of months, my mom and dad had some friends that lived in Los Angeles, and we were in Barstow, which is on the Mojave Desert, in a little tiny home that was called a Victory Home at that time that the government put up for all the men in service coming home. So we were in that little temporary home, and my mom and dad left for a weekend to go to Los Angeles for a wedding. And on the way there, a car ran into them, a man who happened to be drunk at the time, and pushed their car over a ravine down a hill. And as a result of that, my dad had some broken ribs, but my mother got a broken neck. And at that time, they didn't have the cures that they have today. And so my mother became a quadriplegic. And she was in the hospital in Los Angeles for 3 months. And I was only in the first grade at that time. And I remember going to see her, and she had this big, heavy leather apparatus all around her neck, and her head was shaved and so on. And I remember being very, very afraid to be there at the time, which is an awful feeling as an adult now. And I think that I was fearful of my mother at the time, but it was scary as a child. At any rate, they after 3 months, they determined that she wasn't going to get any better, that she was always going to be paralyzed. So they moved, my mother and our family moved back to Toledo, where we came from just months before. And so that was the beginning of a whole new change in our life. A long story. It goes on and on from there, but that was my childhood. And my mother lived 7 years as a quadriplegic, and then she passed away, which brings me to the point then after she passed away. Well, first of all, I should say they were only 35 when this happened. So they were a very young couple with many high dreams that never happened, never developed. And so it was a very, very difficult time for all of us, but especially for my parents. And it took me years to realize what they went through instead of just thinking what I was going through at the time. But as a result of all of that, my dad did remarry after a while, and that moved us onto a street called Bancroft Street, into a house where my stepmother was living. And down the street, just 3 houses down, there was this young teenage boy, my age, whose name was Bruce. And that's how I met him.
What took your family to Toledo?
Well, we were born in Toledo.
Okay.
The whole family was there, my parents.
And they moved out to California.
And they moved to California in hopes of this wonderful dream of starting a whole new life together, which never happened.
Okay. What does your dad do? What did he do for a living?
That was during the wartime, and my dad, he tried to sell real estate at one time. He was an insurance agent. He did various jobs, but none of them paid that well, none of them. So we moved around a lot, from one house to another. We rented. And so the dream was to get this beautiful home that they were going to actually be able to get. And he went out there to start working on the Santa Fe Railroad, which was, he was going to be an engineer in time. And they had great dreams for that, but it never happened. So.
What did he do when he came back to Toledo? The real estate you were talking about?
No, because when he came back to Toledo, we moved in with my aunt and uncle, who had a big Victorian house, and we lived with them for a year. And then another relative, my dad's uncle, had some property, and we rented from them. And then my dad needed to make more money financially to survive all of that we were going through. And so he took a construction job. Well, shortly after my mother died, my dad was working out on the road, on the highways and construction. And had, he was driving a big crane, one of these big high cranes. And the top of the crane, I don't know what it's called, the handle of the thing, went up and it hit an electrical wiring. And my dad had 1 foot on the crane and 1 foot on the ground. And so the electricity went through his body, went right down through his back and all the way down through his foot. And so my dad was in the hospital for 3 months then with electrical burns through his body, and he suffered tremendously. And what I remembered about that is the smell, the stench of burning skin was awful during that time. And I really have to say, it took me years before I really appreciated what both my mom and my dad went through. It was not an easy life for either one of them. So.
And did he pass from that?
No, he lived. He survived that, and again, like I say, then he remarried, and he lived to be in his 70s. So. Yeah.
So, you met Grandpa as he was was down the street, lived down the street from you.
Yep.
You met him in school, or you met him in the neighborhood?
I met him right when we were starting our freshman year in high school. And we were both the same age and same grade. And so...
he was in your classes?
Yes, I saw him in school, but I saw him in the street first. And funny thing, because he was told my name was Diane instead of Deanne. And so my sister and I were walking down the street one day, and so he was sitting in the car with his buddy, being really cool. And so when I walked by him, he said, "Hi, Diane." Well, I was very shy, very bashful, and I knew that wasn't my name anyway, so I just kept on walking. And so he said it again, "Hi, Diane," and I just kept walking past him, and he said, "Well, who needs you anyway?" That was the beginning.
Wow. That was the first time you ever spoke?
Yes.
Wow. Well, you didn't speak.
No.
He spoke.
But
and so what was it that led you to hit it off, to talk more?
Well, first of all, he was very handsome at the time.
At the time?
Yeah. He had thick, blackish, dark brown, wavy hair.
Well, I would have loved to see that.
Yeah. Because he didn't look like that in the end, but he did. And he dressed cool, and he had, back then they had suede shoes, and he had white suede shoes, and he had gray flannel slacks and a pink shirt. And at that time, that was very cool.
Yeah.
So he looked very cool.
And then what year was this approximately?
1952.
1952 is when you met.
Yep.
And you were 13, 14?
14 or 15.
14 or 15.
Right before 15, probably.
And so you both graduate from high school
Together.
Bedford?
No. DeVilbiss in Toledo, which was the big elitist school at the time. And we didn't fit that pattern because none of us had money, but we were there in the school district.
So you graduate and then get married shortly after.
We did, which is something I would never advise anybody to do, because at 18, we were 18 and he was almost 19, just before his 19th birthday, but you don't really know what you want at that young age. You really don't know what life is going to be like for you. And quite honestly, it was an escape for both of us, because we came from hard situations and not happy situations. And so it was an escape for both of us. This was how we were going to get out of it. And I was working at the Ohio Bell Telephone Company in the office, and he was working at a gas station at the time, and this looked like the good way to do it. So we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you were married, he worked at the gas station for when did he get an start working at the
Well,
he worked
after
at the water plant, but before that he was at the Ford.
yeah, he was, and we were quite blessed by the people that I think God put in our path a lot of times, and we didn't know it at the time, but in time I began to see that. Um, and so, where I lived before we got married, I lived with my dad and my sister and my brother in an upper duplex. Well, the couple downstairs that owned the duplex, they were very kind to us and took a liking to us. And so they found a house for us out in Bedford, in just over the line into Michigan. And they found a little house that was within our means, but we didn't have the deposit on it. They put up the deposit so that we
Wow.
could move into that house, which was extremely generous at
These
that
were
time.
these were
Friends, they
o-
were
older
older
friends
couple.
that you were living in their duplex.
Yep.
You at while you were married or before we were married?
Before we were married.
You were living there.
Yeah, and uh, then after we were married, we lived in a couple of little efficiency apartments, and then that duplex became open again, and so we moved there,
Moved
which
back in.
restored that relationship with this couple. And then they, because they took a liking to Bruce and me, and because they were very charitable, loving people, they put up the down payment so we could move into this little house out in Temperance where we lived for a lot of years and raised our kids there.
That was Coral Court.
Yes?
So you didn't build that house?
No.
No.
We were the
Okay.
second owners.
Wow. And you moved there in 56 or 58?
No, we moved there in 59 because
59.
Our first son, Jeff, father, was just a toddler. And I remember that well because when we were moving in, it was in the summer and it was very hot out. So we had all the windows open. And because we were out in the country, there were a lot of ants, little tiny ants. And so we had these little ant buttons in the windows and the window ledges to catch the ants so they wouldn't come into the house. And Jeff, who was just a toddler, was walking around when we were moving in, and he picked up one of these little capsules that looked like a bottle cap, and it was this poison for the ants, and he put it in his mouth, poison.
Mm.
And I happened to be home at the time, and I happened to see him, so I scooped him up and drove like crazy to get into the hospital in Toledo to have his stomach pumped, and I was terrified that he wasn't going to make it at the time, but he did just fine.
He did. Were there any lasting side effects from that?
No,
No.
No.
Okay.
If they caught him, they pumped his stomach and he was
Okay.
fine, but it was scary at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm
Yeah.
sure. So you lived there from 59 until 2000 and let me guess, 6,
Something like that.
7?
Let's see. I don't remember. 2000 something. Well, the house that we moved into was the second owner, and it was built in 2000 and no, it was built in 1999. 1999, and so it was 2000 something early. I
Yeah.
don't know exactly in there.
I have a lot of memories at that old house on Coral Court.
Right.
Visiting for the summer, every summer, just about every summer, I'd spend a week or two there, and then you'd take me to the church where you were still working there as you were in the office.
Mm-hmm. I was a Christian educator.
Yeah, and they had the basketball court. I'd play basketball, and then we'd occasionally you'd have me pull weeds to get some chore money for toys and things. You'd have me pull weeds, and we'd play sports out there. And I remember staying in the room there, and my dad's old room, I believe it was, that would stay in, and so a lot of memories there. I was very saddened when you guys sold it, but I understand with all the work and a lot of lawn there that had to be done.
Close to an acre.
Yeah, a lot of lawn, and but a beautiful beautiful house. A lot of good memories there, and so I do miss that house and the Christmases and all the things we
Yeah.
did there. Um, so tell me about how you came to know the Lord.
Okay. Your grandpa at that time was working still at the gas station in our early married years. And so he worked evenings. And so I spent a lot of time, and I worked during the day, and then came home in the evening. And after dinner, I would watch television at that time. And Billy Graham was very big at that time. That was when he did so many crusades, and every time he did a big crusade, it was telecast. And if you remember anything of his crusades, he always asked at the end of his messages for people to make a commitment to the Lord. And so I watched it a lot of times, and each time I thought, something is pulling me in that direction, and it just kept going. And so every time it was on, I quickly turned on the TV and watched it. And then one of the times I was watching, I thought, that's it. And I got down on my knees in front of the TV and made my very first commitment to the Lord. And I would say there were many times afterwards when I recommitted, and each time I think the Lord pulled me a little bit closer to him. But I didn't just, I did it in one time, but then each time I had more of a desire to make more of a deeper commitment, and so different things along the way.
Now, for Grandpa, it was different though.
Yes.
He didn't trust Christ
No.
at the time you did.
No, he did not.
Did you ever? So after you came to faith in Christ, did you talk to him and want him to also believe?
Well, he knew that and he would watch Billy Graham with me.
Okay.
He wasn't adverse to it. He just wasn't into it.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I would say.
So I should have prefaced this. Your parents and his parents, was there much of a background of Christianity at all, going to church or anything like that?
Okay, well, his mother was she wasn't very active in the church, but she went regularly to the Lutheran church in downtown Toledo. That was her thing. But his mom and dad were divorced, and he didn't see much of his actual dad, and his stepdad was an alcoholic, and so that was not a good situation there. And then on my side of the family, I really don't know, because I was only in the first grade when my mother had her accident, and she was bedridden. She couldn't move at all for 7 years. So I don't know what her faith really was.
Yeah.
I do know she would have said that she was a Christian.
Okay.
But I can't really testify to that one way or the other. And my dad was totally wrapped up in just survival.
Yeah. Which was a common thing, I think,
Yes.
back then.
Yes.
So not coming from a extremely strong
No.
Christian background. So this Billy Graham was like, he was just introducing you to this kind of whole new thing.
Yes.
About the Lord, like having a relationship with Jesus was
Right.
like kind of a new thing. So for Grandpa, as he would watch that and say, this is interesting, but not for me.
Yeah, I think it was the story that he tells is we had some real tumultuous times in our early marriage. Again, you don't get married at 18 and things go smooth because you don't know that much about life. There's a lot of problems.
Right.
And so at one time he started going to a psychiatrist. He thought that might help, and he did that on his own. Now my pushing him. He just decided he needed to do that, which was a good thing. Well, at one time he went by himself. I never went with him. And he was pouring out his soul to this psychologist at the time. And he looked up and he was telling him all this stuff, and he looked up, and the man that he was telling to was falling asleep. He was nodding and falling asleep. And so he left there in anger, and he started driving away. And he said that's when it hit him that that was not the answer in his life. And he just, God, there's got to be something better for me.
Mm-hmm.
And he pulled over when he was driving, and he pulled over and he asked God to guide him, direct him, and change his life around. And that was the beginning for him.
Yeah.
He would always tell that story, that changed life for him.
Yeah.
And for me, in working in the church, that was another story. I loved what I was doing. I loved learning Bible stories, all the things that went into being a Sunday school teacher, etc. But it took the pastors, and I served under 5 different pastors during my time at the church. And each one of those pastors led me a little bit deeper into my faith by the things. The first one, David Young, who was pastor for the longest in my time, I admired him. So his family, they were everything I wanted my family to be. They had a strong marriage. They were good for each other, and they loved the Lord, and there was something in it that I wanted. And so I learned from him, and he was a good teacher, a good Bible study teacher. So that was the beginning with him. And then each pastor along the way that I worked with had some quality that I admired and I wanted to know more about it. And each thing was a step closer to the Lord.
So, so Grandpa kind of had this, not having a great Christian upbringing, but being aware of your decision to receive Christ, and also being aware of the teachings and preachings of Billy Graham. Watching that, he goes and tries to find a resolution in this psychiatrist and doesn't find it, and that kind of pushes him to finally giving in to the Lord, mm-hmm. who he had been I'm thinking of the word, but made aware of is not the word I'm thinking of, but exposed to. He had been exposed to the gospel mm-hmm. message, but had never received it until he had this incident with the psychiatrist.
Right.
And you telling me that just reminds me of the psalm that says I think it's the prodigal son. No man cared for my soul. I may be getting that wrong. Maybe it was David. No man cared for my soul, and but the Lord does, of course. And interesting how the Lord drove him to him using that psychiatrist, obviously, mm-hmm. to drive him to accepting him. So you worked at the Fairgrain Presbyterian Church.
I did.
For how you were a member there for how many years?
Over 50, because that's where we got married.
That's where you got married.
And it was just a block away at the time from where I lived. That's how we had to go there. And my brother, who was 9 years older than I, he said, when my mother was paralyzed, he said, we, meaning my sister, my brother, and I, need to find a church. That was the first. And so he dragged, because he had these long legs, and he just pushed me along the street. And I was a little kid. And he just pushed me right over to Fairgreen Church, because it was just a block away.
Yeah.
And that's, at that time, it's called Rosewood Church, but the same church.
So you were attending there before, when you were a child, then, when you weren't
yes.
even married or anything.
Right. And
so
we got married there.
You got married there.
But it meant nothing, truthfully.
Say what?
But it really meant nothing other than it was you get married there because that's what you did in the 50s. You got married in a church. And
yeah.
So, yeah.
And then you begin working. When did you leave Ohio Bell and begin working at the school, or was that the
Okay, well, I
timeline?
worked at Ohio Bell until I was pregnant for your dad. Then I left there because you didn't, when you were pregnant, you didn't work. Anyway, but I started working at a church. Well, that's a story. I had a very close friend. Her name is Connie Winslow, and Connie's husband died when he was 40 years old in a freakish thing. And so she had three children, and we had three children, and we were friends. And so we took vacations together. And Bruce, your grandpa, became kind of the father to all of us, to the two sets of families and that. So we did these trips together, and we went to Vermont, this wonderful place that we loved. And so coming home from Vermont one year, we stopped at this big motel. And at the motel, Grandpa took the six kids, and they went down to go swimming. And so my friend Connie and I were up in the room on the balcony, and we were talking. And she said, "Now that your kids are growing, and that, what would you like to do with the rest of your life?" That was the beginning of something else in my life. And so I said, "I love what I'm doing as a volunteer. I love working in the church. I love doing bulletin boards. I love writing stories for the church and all this stuff." And she said, "Well, what do you think about that then?" And I said, "But there's no such job as that. Never heard of a job that does that." And she said, "Well, let's pray about it." Well, I wasn't used to being around a person that said, "Let's pray about it," but she did, and we did. Well, right afterwards, I went back to church, and I was serving on the Christian Ed committee of the church at the time. And at that next meeting, which is a couple weeks after what I just told you, and the man that was conducting the meeting, at the end of the meeting, he said, "Oh, I have this paper here that came from Presbytery." He said, "But nobody's interested." And he said, "But I should just tell you, it says that the Presbytery is offering this opportunity for people to get training to be Christian educators." And then he threw the paper in the wastebasket, and the meeting adjourned. I picked the paper out of the wastebasket when everybody was gone. I took it home, and the next morning I went and saw the pastor, David Young, that I mentioned, and I gave him the paper, and I said, "I want to do this." He said, "No, you don't." And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "It's one thing to volunteer at church and do what you want to do. It's another thing to work in it every day and have to follow a plan and have to discipline yourself and learn what to do and what not to do." He
Very
said, "I don't
true.
think, yeah," he said, "I don't think you want to do that." I said, "Yes, I do." So he said, "Okay, I'll help you get started." Well, so he called the Presbytery office, et cetera, to line it up for me. Well, there was no money for this. Well, there happened to be, again, God put people in my life that I didn't see at the time, but I recognized later. And there was a professor from the University of Toledo that was on a member of the congregation. And he learned about my desire to do this training, which would take a whole year, which meant going down to past Worcester, Ohio, down in southern Ohio, on a weekend, one weekend a month for a year. That was
Wow.
the schooling. And so he put up the money. I forgot how many $100 it was that it took for this, and I didn't have a penny of it, and the church didn't have any money for it. So this professor paid my way,
Mm.
and off I went. And I would say Grandpa was not happy about that because we had kids at home, little
He had to
kids,
watch
and
all the
he did
kids.
not cook and he didn't do any of these
Yeah.
things. And
For 2 nights or one night?
I would leave on a Friday morning, come home on a Sunday night. And I
Wow.
did that one week and a month for a year.
And how old were the kids?
Well, Mike would have been the youngest because he was grade school still,
Okay.
but I don't remember exactly. But he was grade
So my
school.
dad was an older teenager
Yes,
by
he
then.
was yeah, right. So anyway, I did it, and I loved it. I loved every bit of it. I was scared to death, and I had to go. We had to go to different churches in the area and conduct teachers' workshops and all these different things, and vacation Bible school and all this stuff. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I loved doing it, and I wanted to continue it. And that was the beginning of.
So how did Fairgreen? How did they afford to pay for it for
Well,
you? I
so
mean,
then the funny thing was, after a year was up, and I got my diploma and everything, and I was so happy. I took my little diploma and I walked in and put it on the pastor's desk, and I said, "I'm ready to go to work now." And he looked at me. He said, "What do you mean?" Well, at that time, Christian edu- Christian educators were a new thing.
this would be like the 70s,
Yes.
probably.
Yep. And so I said, "I want to work in the church. I want to work part time, whatever you can do for me. I want to help build up the Sunday school. I want to teach. I want to do blah, blah." And so he said, "Okay, I don't know what that means." He said, "We don't have any placement." He said, "Well, let's see. We have a closet down there that we could take stuff out of, and that could be your office." No, that wouldn't work. No windows, little tiny thing. And we have the library. I said, "No, that wouldn't work because people would be in and out of the library all the time. We didn't do that." So we finally found a little room at the end of the hall that was used for the nursery but hadn't been used much. And so they made that into my office. And so I brought a portable typewriter from home and a typewriter stand and said, "Okay, I'm ready to go to work." And that was how I started.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so they had enough money to pay you something.
Well, no. As a matter of fact, they paid me $10 a week at that time, and it was for 10 hours at the start.
Wow.
But 29 years later, after different pastorates and a long story of how it all developed, I was working 35 hours, which put me into full-time ministry at that time. And I was getting different benefits and stuff, so it grew.
Yeah.
And I was very blessed to be involved in other churches, Presbyterian churches, but nevertheless, I was involved in going around our presbytery and doing teachers' workshops, etc. That was a real gift from God.
So how long were you in that position?
29 years.
29 years under how many pastors?
5.
5 pastors. So you and Grandpa had you had some years there. Good,
We did, but
good amount of years.
But we did, and I would say I definitely grew spiritually. I trust I did, but it took us leaving the church and going to another church of a different denomination. That's what it took for Grandpa to start growing spiritually.
Really?
And we got involved in this church that we go to now. And I started a small group in our home every Sunday night. And we had as many as 18 in our little house. But it was such a blessing. And it was there and then that I saw that Grandpa really started growing spiritually, much more deeper.
Yeah.
Spiritual leadership.
So tell me about your weekly ladies' Bible studies.
Well, when I retired from the church, when I left the church after 29 years, I said to the church secretary I was really going to miss, because that was so much a part of my life and I loved what I was doing, but it was time for me to leave for a number of reasons and I knew it. And so I said, "I'm not sure what I can do now." And she said, "What's wrong with you starting Bible study in your home?" Oh, what an idea. And so I did. I started right afterwards, and it grew. And it's been going on since, I was retired, 20, I don't know, something like 18 years now. Somewhere's in there.
Unbelievable. Started at Coral Court.
It started right after we moved to where we are in McCoy.
I thought you had it at Coral Court.
Well, it was started,
Okay.
but a very short,
very short amount of time, right before you moved.
Yeah.
And so it's been almost 20 years.
Yes.
Do you have anyone that's there that was there with you at the beginning? I mean, maybe Aunt Karen?
Yeah, Aunt Karen
Aunt
was
Karen?
one,
Anybody else?
and Darlene was one.
Yeah.
Um, Probably 3 or 4 people have died since then.
Yeah.
And a lot of new people come and go on. People come for a period and maybe they're there for a few years and then something happens in their life and they move on, just like a church. Yeah.
So it's every Tuesday?
Every Tuesday.
Every Tuesday at
1 to 2:30 supposedly, but the 2:30 is now stretched to closer to 4.
My dad was telling me that
Yeah.
he was coming over and you said, well, we'll be, he said, I'm going to be there at 4:30. And she said, oh, we'll be done. You said, we'll be done by then. You know, we start at 1. He said at 4:30, you all were still there.
Some of us.
So how do the people find out? Are these just friends and family members, or is it just word of mouth?
It's word of mouth. Just, you talk to people, and a lot of people say something about, well, I'd like to know more about the Lord. I'd like to know more about Bible study. Well,
yeah.
Here is an open invitation to you.
You know, what I've found in the church is that people are more willing to come to a small group like that than they are to just come to the church service if they're not church-going people.
Right.
Because it seems to me like nowadays people are looking more for a relationship rather than just going to church, because they weren't really, I don't think the culture isn't anymore, we go to church. So, but I've noticed that people are more willing to do things like that. So that's amazing that, you have that, that ministry. And what do you remember the largest group you ever had?
Of the Tuesday Bible study?
Yes. How many was the most amount of people you had at once?
12.
12.
Which is a lot for our little house.
Right. So normally you're what, 4 or 5?
Normally we're 6 to 8.
6 to 8. Okay.
But 12 is
12's a lot in there. You don't even have 12 chairs.
No.
You got to sit some in one room, some in the other.
Yeah. It worked.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
Yeah. And when we did the small groups on Sunday nights, we had as many as 18. That was really a challenge, finding where people could sit. But
now the Sunday night was at Corl Court, or was that also?
No, that was
at the new house.
Yeah.
Okay, so 18's a lot in there.
Yeah.
That you definitely would have a struggle to fit everybody in there.
Yeah.
You were married for how many years? 68? 67. And of course, Grandpa passed away almost a year, June 19th. A couple weeks away from a year since he passed. And what would you say are some of the keys to staying together in a marriage for that long?
Well, a give and take situation to begin with, and tolerance and respect for one another. Definitely. You have to have respect for each other, and you have to show that respect for each other. I think it's making the other person feel like they really matter. It's love, but it's a way of putting love into action by what you do. Not only what you say, but what you do for one another. And as we get older, there's so many things, trials that you go through in life, and we lose our looks as such. He's not as handsome as he was when he was 16, and nor am I. So everything changes that way, but there's a deeper love that comes out of it. Wanting to make the other person happy, and wanting to do for them. And there's one thing I can say for your grandpa is he was very, very sensitive to my feelings and what I needed, whenever I needed something. He'd bend over backwards whether he could do it or not. He did it if he thought it would make me happy.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I always loved his dry sense of humor.
Yes.
The jokes that he would make.
Yeah.
I always appreciated that. One of my favorite memories. I shouldn't say one of my favorite. One of the funnier memories were some of the garage sales that you put on on Coral Court.
Yep.
And the pictures you have of me in various costumes trying to get people to come in. But one of them was, Grandpa was working back then. It was before he had retired. And you and I during the day, I was probably 9 or 10 and maybe 8. And during the day, we'd be setting up the garage sale, getting everything ready. You're pricing everything, getting signs up. And he came home from work and saw that we were doing the garage sale, and he said, I think it was Tuesday. We'll just say it was Tuesday, and the garage sale wasn't until Thursday or Friday. And I remember him saying, I wish you would have told me before, because then I would have had enough time to be able to get some stuff together for the garage sale. And we were laughing because it was 3 days away, but that wasn't enough time for him
I know.
to make some decisions on what to sell in the garage sale. But I'll never forget that. That was so funny.
Funny.
Yeah, it was funny, and it was a good memory.
And we just looked at each other and laughed because we had 3 days.
Yeah, 3 days.
How much more time do you need to go through your closet? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was fun.
Yeah.
What are some? So you had 3 boys. My wife has one on the way in August. It would be a boy, so it'd be 3 boys. So some advice for me and my wife. How do you raise 3 boys? What is the advice that you have for us, or tell us how you did it?
Well, the one thing I know for a fact is you can have 3, you can have 6, whatever number you have, they're all different. No 2, even if they're raised the same or in the same house, they are not. Their personalities are very different from one another. So you can't say you raise them all the same, because you can't, because they have different personalities and different styles and that. And so you have to deal with who they are. And I can say that Jeff, Greg, and Mike are all very different and they were raised different from each other too, because Greg, being the middle child, he was always one of a great adventure, and he was always climbing trees. He was always doing all these wild things that Jeff never thought of doing. They just were different personalities, so you have to adjust to that. Another thing I would say about it is right now, especially I'm reading again Proverbs, and Proverbs stresses so deeply the need for discipline, and that's a mistake that I think many young people make today when they don't discipline their children enough.
That's good.
Because what I see now, as our 3 sons have grown up and their respect for their dad, one of the things they really respected was the discipline.
Mm-hmm.
That they said, all 3 of them have said to me at one time or another that their growing up years were wonderful. Well, that surprised me when I heard it. Really did. But on the other hand, I think they respected their dad. And their dad, I don't remember him ever really spanking the kids. Now, maybe he did some. I'm sure he did some when they were real little. But basically, he didn't. I did. I chased him around with the paddle, and they laughed at me.
Yeah.
But he had a way of speaking to them that they knew they didn't cross their dad ever. And when he said something, they listened and they obeyed. And there's power in that. You don't have to physically be too strict. That's not good either, to be too strict. But they knew, and they would all try things at times, because boys are boys. And they try their things out and try to get away with something. But he always had a way of knowing what was going on. They always thought he had an extra set of eyes somewhere because he knew what. I remember one time, for instance, when we had a junior high and a senior high building right next to each other. And one time, their dad was driving cars. That was when he worked for the car dealership, and he was driving, testing a car. And of course, he would always go by the school at the time just to see what was going on, because he did that. And he happened to see one of our sons running from the junior high building over to the next building, which was the library, which means they were escaping school.
That was my
He
dad.
and a couple other kids, boys, were escaping, and they were going over to the library. And their dad happened to drive right by at that time. And so at supper time that night, I remember him saying to his son, "So how was school today?" "Oh, yeah, it was fine. Why, you ask?" And he said, "Did you enjoy the library?" And that, and one thing led to another. And he didn't have to say anything more. They knew. They knew that he was watching out for him, and he was taking care of the situation, and he handled it very well. So
yeah. My dad has told that story before.
Yep.
It's one of my favorite stories that
Yeah.
he tells about, getting caught.
Yep.
And that's a great story.
Yeah.
What are maybe one of your, as we kind of wrap up, what are some of your one or two of your favorite memories? Could be from anything: raising kids, marriage, vacations, anything.
I would say my two favorite times in my 87 years of life, my favorite times were always vacations. I don't remember vacations before we were married. Because of the situation with my parents and so on. I don't remember us ever taking vacations because of my mother's situation, and we didn't do those things. But the vacations that Bruce and I took and with our children were invaluable. And sometimes we took vacations in early years and we didn't have enough money to pay for it. But it was so worth it. It was so worth it. I would recommend that to any family, because that's a time when the family is totally together and they're relaxed, and it's a time to build memories. So the vacations and the other times were the holidays, and Christmas and Easter were always my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved doing things with the kids and finding gifts for them that would have meaning to them. And on Easter, we always hid the Easter baskets all over the house, and in the dryer and in the trunk of the car and wherever, and they had to go look for them. And then I tried to carry that over with the grandkids as well. So those were my favorite times, family times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, obviously, when you and Grandpa took everybody to Disney World. And I was sick. I think it was a 3-day trip, and I think I was sick 2 days out of the 3. So the first day I remember being really cold, and I told my dad, "This is Florida. It's supposed to be hot here. It's supposed to be warm. Why am I so cold?" And I was the only one that was cold.
Yeah.
And then I was sick for the rest of that day and the next day, and then the last day I think I spent, in Disney World. So I have some memories of it, but I do remember that was a big ordeal. We got some pictures from that, all the kids and parents and grandparents together. So I'll close then with this: favorite Bible verses and favorite preachers to listen to. Favorite Bible verses and favorite preachers to listen to.
Well, I have a lot of verses that I like. One of them is, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you." And I think I skipped a part of that, but I just said that.
Matthew 6:33.
Yeah, it is Matthew 6:33. Mm-hmm. And Romans 8:28. you're asking me now, and I'm drawing a
Yeah,
blank.
yeah.
All
All
things work
things.
together for good to those who love the Lord and do according to His purpose. And I'm not saying that right either, which I would do if you didn't have me doing this now.
Just on camera.
Yeah,
You
right.
forget, yeah.
And then favorite pastors to listen to. Gosh, there are so many. Of course, Billy Graham was always
You
one of
got
my
saved under
favorites.
his preaching, yeah.
Powerful preaching. Um, gosh, I don't know. I love Charles Stanley.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I loved David Jeremiah. I don't know, Max Lucado. I can name a bunch of pastors and stuff over the years that I listened to.
I know you like Alistair Begg.
Yes, from
Yeah. I don't know if
Cleveland.
he's your favorite, but
Yes, he's one of them.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
from
good.
Cleveland. And one of the pastors that I worked under, introduced me to Alistair Begg.
Oh, wow.
That's how I learned that one. So, yeah, a lot of them.
Yeah.
I think you can learn from a lot of different people.
Sure.
Different styles, different things that they say and share.
Sure.
Yeah.
We have been going for 56 minutes.
Oh, my goodness.
And I feel like we could go longer. I don't know how much storage my phone and my computer have, so I don't know how much longer we could actually record.
Yeah.
But any thought or wisdom, parting words that you would give? Let's say, let me be more specific. Let me ask you for, and again, I'm throwing all of this on you. 2 hours ago, you didn't even know we were going to do this, so it's definitely spur of the moment. And I didn't really know exactly what I was going to ask you, other than a couple basic things. But maybe for me specifically, as a pastor, as a father, as a husband, and as your grandson, what advice and counsel would you give to me, or maybe a parting wise words?
Well, first, I'm going to get teary-eyed on this one. First of all, I've seen tremendous growth in you, just tremendous growth, and I love what I am seeing and what I'm hearing. I love your witness. I see you're a very compassionate person, very caring person, and it's so necessary as a pastor to be. There isn't a person in the congregation that ever doesn't want to have the pastor acknowledge them in one way or another, and that's missing sometimes with some people. And you have a good handle on that, good growth on that. The other thing that I really treasure in you is I see an openness to learn, and not to be too rigid or too closed to learning new ways and new understanding and trying new things. I love the fact that you do things with technology as a young pastor, because that's the future, and that's a beautiful avenue to reach people. And I love what I see you doing with your Psalms, and all these things that you do are great. But I especially love that you are open, and without saying too much, I think the fact that you are willing to learn and willing to listen to what other people do. And as a father, I love seeing you with your kids. That's a ministry in itself. And I see you having fun with them and enjoying them, and that warms my heart. So, yeah.
Amen. Well, hope to be able to have you on again sometime. I know we definitely got to get this situation figured out a little better, but I certainly have enjoyed it, and love you dearly. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your life and your story with us. And so at that, we will end the video, and hope all of you that are watching have taken some wisdom from the life of my grandma. And I think that we need a lot more godly women like Deanne Claire Smale. Claire
Blanchard Smale.
Claire Blanchard Smale. Yeah.